They laughed when she walked through those glass doors wearing her simple cardigan and carrying a worn canvas bag. They snickered at her modest sedan in a parking lot full of luxury trucks. They mocked her soft-spoken voice when she asked about range time. But 2 hours later, those same people watched in absolute silence as this elementary school teacher made a shot that defied every law of physics they thought they knew. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and this is how she brought an entire team of so-called tactical experts to their knees, with nothing more than steady hands and an unbreakable spirit. Have you ever been looked down on simply because you didn't look the part? Share in the comments where you're watching from, because this story proves that true skill has nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with heart. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine parking lot of Apex Tactical Range as Sarah Mitchell pulled up in her 12-year-old Toyota Camry. The car looked almost apologetic sitting next to the row of massive pickup trucks and gleaming SUVs, each one worth more than she made in 2 years of teaching 3rd grade. She sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, gathering the courage that had taken her 6 months to build. Sarah had saved every spare dollar for 8 months to afford this moment. $20 here, $30 there, skipped dinners, and foregone coffee shop visits, all leading to this day. The money wasn't even the hard part. It was walking through those doors, knowing she didn't belong in their world, knowing they would see right through her. The building itself was intimidating, all black glass and steel, designed to make a statement about money, power, and exclusivity. The kind of place where membership required more than just the ability to pay. It required the right connections, the right background, the right image. Sarah possessed none of these things. She was just an elementary school teacher from the suburbs, 34 years old, living in a small apartment with her rescue dog, Charlie. The glass doors opened to reveal a lobby that looked more like a high-end hotel than a shooting range. Marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers, and leather furniture was arranged around a massive fireplace. The walls displayed photographs of celebrities and politicians posing with firearms, all smiling for cameras that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Behind the reception desk stood a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a tactical catalog. His name tag read, Brad Huntington, Director. Everything about him was perfectly pressed, from his black tactical polo to his cargo pants with more pockets than any human could possibly need. His blonde hair was cut in what Sarah assumed was a military style, though something about it seemed too perfect, too manufactured. His eyes swept over Sarah with the kind of dismissal usually reserved for telemarketers. She noticed how his gaze lingered on her cardigan, her sensible flats, the canvas tote bag she carried instead of whatever expensive gear bag he obviously expected. "Can I help you?" he asked, though his tone suggested helping was the last thing on his mind. The question came out clipped, professional but cold, like he was already calculating how quickly he could get her out of his facility. "I'd like to use your range," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the butterflies performing acrobatics in her stomach. Brad's laugh was sharp and immediate, echoing off those marble walls like a gunshot. "Ma'am, this is Apex Tactical Range. We're not really set up for beginners. Maybe you'd be more comfortable at one of those family-friendly places downtown." The condescension in his voice was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Around the lobby, other patrons had turned to watch the interaction. Sarah counted at least 6 men, all wearing variations of the same tactical uniform, all sporting the kind of gear that screamed expensive hobby rather than actual experience. "I'm not a beginner," Sarah replied, her voice remaining calm and measured, the same tone she used when one of her students was having a difficult day. This seemed to amuse Brad even more. "Really? And what kind of experience do you have? Paintball, video games?" His audience chuckled appreciatively, clearly enjoying the show. A man stepped forward from the gathering crowd, his chest puffed out like a peacock displaying its feathers. His tactical vest had so many patches and badges it looked like a Boy Scout sash gone wrong. The nameplate on his gear read, "Jake Morrison, Tactical Instructor." "Brad's right," Jake said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being the biggest fish in a small pond. This isn't a place for soccer moms to try out their action movie fantasies. We run serious training here, real operators only. The group of men behind him nodded in agreement, their matching tactical gear making them look like a paramilitary book club. Sarah noticed that despite all their expensive equipment, none of them had the easy confidence of people who'd actually used their gear in real situations. They wore their tactical identity like a costume, all surface and no substance. Sarah reached into her tote bag and pulled out a crumpled envelope containing her carefully saved money. The bills were worn from being counted and recounted, each one representing a small sacrifice, a meal skipped or a purchase postponed. "I can pay your fee." Brad glanced at the money like it might contaminate his perfectly manicured hands. "It's not about the money, sweetheart. It's about maintaining standards. We cater to law enforcement, military contractors, security professionals. People who take this seriously." Jake stepped closer, invading Sarah's personal space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. "Look, lady, we've all heard the stories. Everyone's got a friend who knew someone who was supposedly special forces. But this is the real world, and frankly, you don't look like operator material." Sarah's hands didn't shake as she placed her money on the counter, though inside old instincts were awakening. "I served my country," she said quietly, the words carrying a weight that seemed to shift the air in the room. The laughter died immediately. Brad's smirk faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "Oh, really? Let me guess. National. Guard weekend warrior, Air Force desk job, Navy photographer?" "Army," Sarah said simply. "Infantry, 2 deployments to Afghanistan." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Infantry meant ground combat, meant being in the thick of things when everything went wrong. It meant Sarah had seen and done things that most of these tactical weekend warriors could only imagine in their video games and action movies. But Brad wasn't backing down. Infantry? Really? And when exactly did women start serving in infantry roles? His question was designed to catch her in what he assumed was a lie. 2013. "I was part of the pilot program. 3rd Infantry Division, Fort Stewart, Georgia," Sarah answered immediately. For a moment the lobby was silent except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of gunfire from the ranges below. Even Brad seemed momentarily at a loss for words, his prepared responses suddenly inadequate. Sarah reached into her bag again and pulled out something that made several people in the crowd gasp audibly. It was a small, leather-bound book, worn smooth from years of handling, followed by a folded piece of paper. She handed the paper to Brad without a word. His face went pale as he unfolded it, revealing an official military document. A commendation for extraordinary marksmanship under combat conditions, signed by a general whose name even these civilian tactical enthusiasts would recognize. The paper shook slightly in Brad's hands as he read portions aloud, his voice becoming smaller with each word. The crowd that had been so eager to mock Sarah moments before now stood in uncomfortable silence, suddenly aware that they'd been laughing at someone whose actual combat experience dwarfed all of their combined tactical fantasies. Jake, desperate to regain control of the situation, stepped forward and grabbed the commendation. "Okay, so maybe you were decent 20 years ago. But that was a long time ago. Skills fade, reflexes slow down. This is a young person's game, and frankly, you look like you'd be more comfortable teaching finger painting than handling firearms." The sight insult hit its mark, and Sarah felt the familiar fire kindle in her chest, not anger at being underestimated, but fury at the arrogance, the casual cruelty, the assumption that because she chose to serve children instead of carrying a gun for a living, she was somehow less than them. "You're right," she said quietly, and Jake smiled triumphantly. "I do teach finger painting, and reading, and math, and how to be kind to people who are different from you. But apparently, that last lesson didn't take with everyone." The shot landed and several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. But Jake wasn't done. "Look, this is all very touching, but sentiment doesn't improve marksmanship. These guys train every day. They compete at the highest levels. They're the best civilian shooters in the state." Before anyone could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "I'll take that bet." Everyone turned to see a man approaching from the direction of the ranges. He was older than the others, maybe 50, with graying hair and the kind of calm confidence that came from actual experience rather than expensive equipment. His clothes were simple, but something about the way he moved suggested this was not someone to underestimate. "Colonel Thompson," Brad said, his voice suddenly respectful. "I didn't realize you were here today." The newcomer nodded at Brad before turning his attention to Sarah. His eyes took in her appearance with the same professional assessment the others had used, but without the contempt. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Colonel James Thompson, retired. I help run the tactical training program here." He studied her for a moment before making his decision. "I propose a simple challenge. 3 shots at 3 different ranges, 100 yards, 200 yards, and 500 yards. Best overall performance wins." Sarah considered this for a moment. "What are the terms?" Thompson looked directly at Brad and Jake. "If the lady wins, this facility donates $10,000 to her school district, issues a public apology for today's behavior, and offers free basic training to any teacher or veteran who wants to learn proper firearms handling." "And if you win?" Sarah asked. "Then you accept our apology for today's misunderstanding, and we'll provide you with complimentary advanced training whenever you'd like." Brad looked uncomfortable with the substantial bet, but with Colonel Thompson's reputation on the line, he had little choice but to agree. "Fine, but we do this properly. Full documentation, witnesses, video recording." "Agreed," Sarah said immediately. "When do we start?" 30 minutes later, Sarah found herself on the first range, studying the setup carefully. 100 yards to a standard bullseye target, not particularly challenging for an experienced shooter, but enough to separate the skilled from the amateur. Colonel Thompson gestured to a table where several rifles were laid out, each one a precision instrument, worth more than most people's cars. "Select your weapon," he said formally. Sarah studied the options carefully, then reached into her tote bag and pulled out something that made several people gasp audibly. It was an old military-issue rifle, the kind that had been standard equipment 20 years ago. Compared to the custom precision instruments on the table, it looked like something from a museum. "Sergeant," Colonel Thompson said carefully, "are you sure about that choice? These civilian rifles are significantly more accurate than military equipment." Sarah worked the bolt on her rifle, the action smooth from years of careful maintenance. "This rifle and I have been together for 22 years. We understand each other." Through the scope, Sarah could see her target clearly. 100 yards was nothing, barely worth calling a long shot. She blocked out the murmuring crowd and focused on her breathing, finding the natural pause between breaths where everything went still. The trigger broke cleanly, and through the scope she could see the result. A perfect shot, dead center of the bullseye. The crowd erupted in surprised applause. Colonel Thompson fired next, using one of the custom rifles with practiced efficiency. His shot was equally impressive, another dead center hit that demonstrated why he was considered one of the region's best marksmen. The second range at 200 yards featured moving targets, powered by a mechanical system that created unpredictable patterns. Sarah watched the target pattern for several cycles, her mind automatically calculating timing and lead angles. She settled into position, tracking the moving target through her scope. The key was to predict where the target would be when the bullet arrived, not where it was when she fired. The shot felt perfect the moment she fired, catching the target dead center as it moved across the range. Colonel Thompson's turn produced an equally impressive result, his custom equipment and steady nerves combining for another perfect score. The final range was set up for extreme precision shooting, 500 yards to targets that looked impossibly small through the scope, with wind machines creating shifting air currents and variable lighting that would affect bullet trajectory. This was the kind of shooting that separated the exceptional from the merely good, where tiny mistakes were magnified by distance and conditions into dramatic misses. Colonel Thompson shot first, his technique flawless and his result excellent, striking just slightly off-center but still within the scoring. Now it was Sarah's turn, and she could feel the weight of expectation from the crowd behind her. This was the moment that would define the entire competition, the shot that would prove whether she was the skilled marksman she claimed to be, or just someone living on outdated reputation. She settled into position and began her pre-shot routine. The same mental checklist she'd used hundreds of times in combat. Wind speed and direction, temperature and humidity, distance to target, all factored into calculations that happened below conscious thought. Through the scope, the target looked impossibly small, a white circle that seemed to dance in the variable lighting. At 500 yards, she was looking at a shot that would challenge the best marksman in the world. But as she found her natural breathing rhythm, something clicked into place. The rust fell away. The years of teaching elementary school faded into background noise, and suddenly she was back in Afghanistan, back in moments when everything depended on making impossible shots under impossible conditions. The world narrowed down to just her, the rifle, and the target. Everything else ceased to exist. There was only the shot. The trigger broke with crystalline clarity, and the bullet began its half-second journey downrange. Through the scope, Sarah tracked its path, watching for the impact that would reveal whether 20 years of rust had finally caught up with her skills. The bullet struck with a sound like a whip crack, and the crowd erupted in shocked silence. Through her scope, Sarah could see the result clearly. Not just a bullseye, but a shot that had struck the exact center of the target, threading the needle between Thompson's excellent shot and perfection. "Perfect 10, the range officer announced, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Center X maximum score." The silence that followed was profound. Then, slowly, the applause began. Not the mocking laughter that had greeted her arrival, but genuine appreciation for a shot that would be talked about for years to come. Colonel Thompson approached Sarah's position, his face wearing the expression of a man who had just witnessed something exceptional. "Ma'am," he said formally, "that was one hell of a shot." He extended his hand, and Sarah shook it with the mutual respect of two professionals who understood the difficulty of what had just transpired. Jake and his team stood in shocked silence, their earlier confidence evaporating completely. The expensive equipment they'd bragged about, the extensive training they'd claimed, none of it had mattered when faced with genuine skill, backed by years of real-world experience. Brad appeared from the crowd, his face pale and drawn. "The terms of the bet," he stammered, clearly struggling with the reality of what had just occurred. $10,000 to the education fund, Sarah reminded him gently. A public apology, and free range time for teachers and veterans. But Sarah wasn't finished. She turned to address the entire crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the range. "I want everyone here to understand something. I didn't come here today to show off or prove anything about myself. I came here because I believe that respect should be earned through character and actions, not bought with expensive equipment or inherited through privilege." She gestured toward a young woman near the back of the crowd, someone she'd noticed wearing a veteran pin. "Every teacher, every nurse, every person who dedicates their life to serving others deserves the same respect you give to people with fancy titles and expensive gear. Service comes in many forms, and all of them matter." She picked up her old rifle and began securing it for transport. "The money you'll donate to our schools will buy books and supplies for kids who dream of serving their country someday. Some will become soldiers, some will become teachers, some will find other ways to make a difference. All of them deserve our support." Colonel Thompson stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to making important decisions. "Effective immediately. This facility will offer free basic firearms safety courses to all teachers and veterans. We'll also be implementing changes to ensure everyone is treated with the respect they deserve." As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah found herself surrounded by veterans who had been present for the competition. Each had their own stories of being underestimated or dismissed, and all wanted to thank her for standing up not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been judged by appearances rather than character. A week later, Sarah received a letter from a young female soldier who had watched the video online. She wrote about facing discrimination in her unit, about being told she didn't belong. But Sarah's example had given her courage to persevere, and she was now excelling in advanced marksmanship training. The letter sits in Sarah's classroom now, next to thank you cards from her third graders and a photo of her old unit. Reminds her daily that our actions ripple outward in ways we can't imagine, and sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply show up as ourselves, refusing to let anyone else define our worth. As Sarah reflects on the experience, she thinks about all the people who've been told they don't belong. To all of them, she would say this: your shot is waiting. It might not be with a rifle, it might be with a kind word, a patient lesson, or simply standing up when everyone else sits down. Excellence doesn't care about your bank account, your connections, or your fancy equipment. It cares about heart, dedication, and the courage to prove that true strength often comes in unexpected packages. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous, not because of what they can destroy, but because of what they can build, inspire, and change. So here's my question for you. What's your impossible shot? What have you been told you can't do because you don't look the part or don't have the right background? Drop a comment below and tell me about a time someone underestimated you. Or share this video with someone who needs to hear Sarah's story today. And if this story inspired you or reminded you that true strength comes from character, not appearance, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories of underdogs who proved everyone wrong. Hit the bell icon so you never miss these amazing real-life comebacks that show the world what happens when quiet confidence meets loud arrogance. Remember, your moment is coming. When it does, don't hesitate. Take your shot. Because the world needs more people like Sarah Mitchell, people who stand up not just for themselves, but for everyone who's ever been counted out before the game even started. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next incredible story.